President Muhammadu Buhari on Thursday, October 7th, presented to a joint session of the National Assembly 16.39 trillion naira 2022 budget. The budget proposal is made up of 6.38 trillion naira recurrent expenditure and a 5.35 trillion naira capital expenditure, with a 3.61 trillion naira earmarked for debt servicing. Now, over 6 trillion naira deficit will be financed through borrowing, a move many people have actually raised concerns about. To analyze provisions in the budget, we have with us in the studio Dr. Abraham Tarfa in the studio. He's a development economist. Welcome to Trust TV.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Mm-hmm.
Now, many would wonder why recurrent expenditure is higher than capital spending. What explanations do you have?
The budget generally must be split into two broad categories, recurrent and capital. But then, if you look at that recurrent, there is a recurrent non-debt expenditure, there's a debt service component of it, and then there's a component that goes for statutory allocation. So because recurrent has a lot of summations, it's normal that it will always be bigger. For example, in this budget proposal for 2022, recurrent is accounting for about 70%. So, but again, like I said, that's like 4 components in one. So, but the idea is that each time people say recurrent is bigger in the budget, they want to quickly point the finger to say, oh, that's for salaries and wages. So they begin to look at advocates to rationalize workers and things like that. The first point I want to point out is that is not accurate. Recurrent is bigger because it is a combination of non-debt expenditure, debt servicing, statutory allocation, and then the normal component that goes for salaries and wages in terms of general aggregation.
Okay, so why do you think defense and security, was prioritized? What's your reaction?
Defense in this 2022 budget has about 1.14 trillion. It's the biggest expenditure space in this specific budget. Insecurity in Nigeria is something that we cannot play with, from banditry to kidnapping to insurgency and then to armed robbery, and all this kind of variants of insecurity. So, but the thing is that allocating that amount to defense or to security in general means that Nigeria has become like a security state, a state that is plagued by insecurity. That's a sad reality. And our budget is now having security, defense in particular, having a large chunk of the allocation. So the sad part about that is that when the defense sector has that kind of allocation, it is most likely that you begin to have more activities around insecurity rise instead of decreasing. Because it's clear now that the money is in defense. And to utilize defense expenditure, you must purchase hardware, military hardware. You must launch operations. These are the expenditure outlines for the defense sector. So the point I'm trying to bring out there is that in as much as we want to address insecurity, addressing insecurity simply means addressing access to health, unemployment, poverty, access to gender-based, preventing gender-based violence, providing access to clean toilets and water. So, but this direct approach of channeling most resources to defense, because we want to tackle insecurity, might be accurate for the economic planners now, but we are saying that to make it more inclusive, to address insecurity, target or seek to wipe out or fix those issues that are drivers of violent extremism, like unemployment, poverty, and inequality.
So do you have any observations to the allocations made to education and infrastructure?
Yes. For the first time, like I said earlier, the component of the budget is statutory, capital, recurrent non-debt, debt service, and then for salaries and wages. Now, statutory allocation is where you have all agencies that are on first-line charge: National Assembly, Human Rights Commission, INEC, NDDC, Northeast Development Commission, not NDDC, Northeast Development Commission, all those kind of agencies, Nigerian Judicial Council, those agencies that their money goes to them directly. For the first time, we now have this statutory allocation to include NASENI, which is National Agency for I think, infrastructure, one infrastructure
Right.
agency. It is now included in the statutory allocation. So that tells you that the government this time around has prioritized infrastructure, and especially to give them a free hand towards the operation. Putting any agency on first line charge means they are giving them revenue access free hand, so that when they get it, they do their thing themselves. So that tells you how the government is prioritizing infrastructure through the including NASENI as a statutory allocation agency. Then in terms of education, the president in July said that education budget will be increased by 50% in 2022 and 2023. If you look at the total allocation to education in the 2022 proposed budget, it's about 700 billion. If you compare it to the one of last year, it's reduced. I think that one was about 732 billion, I think. This is still also around 700, but it's lower.
Right.
So when we hear that the president promised that education budget will prioritize for 2022 and 2023, we're expected to see that education will be larger than what it is. That's the point I'm trying to make. So the trend for the allocation of the size of allocation for education does not show that there's commitment towards addressing or prioritizing allocation to education, as the president said during the education financing summit that held in the UK.
All right.
Okay, now the budget is to be financed mainly by borrowings, that's new borrowings. Now, do you see a problem with this? And also, does Nigeria have other alternatives as opposed to more borrowings?
Generally, Nigeria has a lot of alternatives aside borrowing. Nigeria, if you take Nigeria as the federation, FCT, the 36 states, and then the federal government, and the local government as well, we have alternative to borrowing. And those borrowing is in terms of exploring our all the mineral resources that we have, all the potential that each state has, from local government to communities, everywhere. Explore this opportunity, get them to become revenue generating activities, and then we get revenue from taxes. That's the alternative. But then that's mid-term to long-term. But in terms of now, this 2022 budget is for next year, 2022. 2021 budget is for now, right now. In terms of now, borrowing seems to be the lowest hanging fruit, the fastest alternative for the federal government. That's why I started by separating federation and federal government. To address revenue challenges right now, borrowing is always the fastest means for the federal government. And that borrowing can either come from external or domestic. If you look at the component of debt servicing in this 2022 proposed budget, debt servicing in total is about 3.9 trillion. Domestic servicing is about 2.1, while external is 1.1. So you can see that domestic borrowing is already heavy. And domestic borrowing simply means you are borrowing through the central bank, through commercial banks, to target specific sectors that you want. Meaning you are taking money from within your own home to other sectors of your home. Ultimately, the home is cash squeezed. That's the challenge of domestic borrowing. But the federal government is also doing its best to utilize domestic borrowing more efficiently. But the new injection in terms of income is external borrowing. Sadly enough, external borrowing is the new money that comes into your economy from outside. It's the new borrowing from the other person's home into your own home. It's not borrowing from your wife or your brother or your sister. That one is one family income rotating.
Right.
New borrowing is from the other home into yours, from your uncle. New injection. So that's the new and that's what external borrowing does. That's what is used to finance all those beautiful infrastructure projects that we see. In fact, external borrowing was even used to finance all those payments of frontline workers during COVID-19 period. A lot of things were done using external borrowing. So in the present reality of revenue challenge in Nigeria, let me quickly say this. Last year, 2021, this year, 2021, we expect to get 8 trillion in revenue. As at August, Nigeria has got about 3.9 trillion. So you can look at it in terms of the rest of the year. It's not likely that we'll attain half of that. So clearly, the 16.3 something trillion budget we have is one that will be financed through borrowing. Sadly, other revenue generating agents means will come in, but that will be mid-term to long-term.
Now, social development and poverty eradication is allocated 863 billion. That's about 5.3% of the entire allocation. Do you think this is enough?
Okay. Social development and poverty eradication. There is no one agency that's responsible for that. It's interministerial, inter-department, inter-agency. You know, technically we have about 48 ministries, departments and agencies, broadly speaking. But if you decompose them, go into these ministries, you see that we are dealing with about 950 to 1,000 ministries, departments, and agencies across the country. So social development and poverty eradication is the program each of these agencies, departments, and ministries are doing that is tied into social development and poverty eradication. Ministry of Labor and Employment, Humanitarian, all of them put together. But economically, because of the way fiscal management wants us to arrange our budget, it's important to always classify your budget into economic development, social and poverty eradication. So how that is done is that you go into the details of the budget, you get every item that's to do with social development and poverty, you find a way of summing all their codes, and then it gives you that allocation. So, but from what you asked, the idea is that we cannot, this is not the time to be investing less in social development and poverty eradication. I already told you earlier that to address insecurity, tackle poverty, tackle access, address out of school children, access to clean water, to tackle rape, address clean toilet and access to clean water, to tackle criminality and bag snatching and armed robbery, fix street lights, ensure safety to work day and night. So this is the concept. So if you want to really address this insecurity, poverty, and the rest, that allocation to social development and poverty needs to be increased, because social sectors like health, education, agriculture are frontline ministries or sectors towards addressing all the inequality we see and the poverty and those factors that make people take up to violent extremism. So it will be important within the context of the reality of how much the federal government can get to prioritize allocation for social development and poverty eradication. Ultimately, if the money is not there to increase their own allocation, what the federal government always do is to use environment to move expenditure switching. Environment is like expenditure switching. Carry from one expenditure line to another line. You reduce from maybe access to data and prioritize addressing sexual and gender-based violence, for instance. You reduce from purchase of new car, increase addressing job creation. Things like that. So the government always have a way to prioritize these programs. And what we are saying that even if the revenue is not there, it's important to prioritize social development and poverty eradication.
Okay, now let's talk about the health sector. It was allocated 5% from the budget, and it roughly translates to 820.2 billion naira. Now, will this percentage greatly improve the sector, and do you see an end to the lingering doctors' strike?
The budget analysis is done in terms of size, share, sensitivity, and then specifics. So in terms of size, that amount will depend on the state of budget programming in the health sector. What projects are new and what projects are ongoing. If a lot of projects are new, then based on the zero-based budgeting framework, they'll be getting fresh allocation as per their cost estimation for implementing those projects. But if it's ongoing, that project might have gotten maybe 10 billion last year. This year cannot have the same 10 billion because it's ongoing. They've attained a level of implementation into this year. So this is how most capital projects are allocated budget. But if you look at the structure of health sector budget, it is mostly recurrent. Because don't forget, in the health sector, recurrent expenditure also has a capital dimension. Because we are talking about personnel that will man those beautiful hospitals you've built, primary healthcare centers that you've put in Gambarungala, in Chibok, in Shani, down to Oyo local government, in Ikeja. You need nurses and midwives to man those places. So if you don't empower them through recurrent and personal expenditure, they will not even go there to man those buildings, those facilities you provided. So then in terms of size, the allocation to health, like I said earlier, if they can do their best within the reality, that sector is one other sector that needs increase in allocation. But don't forget, in 2021, there was supplementary budget, and the health sector was also accommodated. So, but instead of just increasing the budget for health, there's need for needs assessment to know what nurses want, what midwives want, what the needs that in medical doctors are facing, pharmacists, all this sector, generally the medical and health workers union, there's need for that discussion with them to identify what even the accountants that work in the health sector need. Because if you recall, during the COVID-19, they gave personal protection equipment to people in isolation centers alone. Meanwhile, when you enter the hospital, a security man at the gate that brings you into the hospital. So if that man has has contact with the COVID-19 patient, that person is gone.
Right.
The account guy on the desk who collects payment from the needs of this COVID-19 patient who has had contact. So the health sector is bigger than medical doctors or nurses. That's the point I'm trying to make. So you need a needs assessment to know what each of them want, so I can actually get right size or know the appropriate allocation for health. Then in terms of share, which is the 5% you talked about, it does not match up to what is required to attain the SDGs. But within the context of Nigerian reality, we might just have to do with what we have in terms of that share. But in summary, there's need for increase in allocation for the health. But let it be based on needs assessment and within the context of our reality in terms of revenue generation and borrowing plan. So what is important is that before this budget came out, this 2022 budget proposal, the Federal Ministry of Finance is always at the forefront to put out documents that will carry the public in terms of knowing how to engage with them with budget. So one document that they released is called the Budget Core Circular. That Budget Core Circular was released since August, I think July. And then that it has revenue ceilings, expenditure ceilings, I beg your pardon, for every MDA. So that is the point of looking at that document, to know that health sector will not get more than this. So stakeholders can begin to engage with the ministries, not Ministry of Finance, but the Ministry of Health and other stakeholders, to see how they can get it to be increased through the appropriation process. So that's in terms of the share. Then in terms of sensitivity, we want to look at how the health sector budget is addressing maybe vascular fistula, supporting the war against sexual and gender-based violence, helping, providing primary healthcare centers in boy-dominated schools or girls-dominated schools, ensuring that access to toilet facilities are engendered, and things like that. So
speaking of gender, we are seeing for the first time MDAs are being advised on gender-responsive budgeting. Do you think this is going to be like a game changer for us?
The Budget Core Circular made it clear that this year they are open to gender-based budgeting framework. But Ministry of Finance can only say that because Ministry of Finance is like the coordinating ministry for all this budget preparation. It does not change or impose the budget for specific MDAs. So Ministry of Finance at best is a policy institution for budgeting. It can only say this is the direction we want your budget to go. Remember, and that direction is not coming from them. It's coming from the priority of the President and the Federal Executive Council. Remember, the President Muhammadu Buhari's administration came into being using security, corruption, and economy. Ministry of Finance will always prioritize those areas. Then SDGs as well and every other discussion. Now, in terms of negotiation, the Budget Core Circular made it clear that the budget will be open to gender-responsive budgeting. Now, in the President's speech when he was presenting the budget, he also made it clear also. So now what is now left now? Because where the stage that the budget is right now, the budget has now been presented to the National Assembly, right? So we're entering that space whereby National Assembly will be inviting heads of ministries, departments, and agencies for discussion. Now the ball is in the court of National Assembly and the people who will be going to do the defense. National Assembly will now be asking them, you are Ministry of Agriculture, where are your projects that prioritize women or girls? Where are your projects that prioritize boys or young or male children? This gender doesn't mean it's all about women. It's simply about inclusion for women, and men, boys, girls, based on the area that they are excluded. For example, if ICT is dominated by men, for example, then there's need to engender the ICT space to bring in more females. If maybe lawn tennis is dominated by females, then Ministry of Sport will have to engender lawn tennis by bringing in more some percentage or proportion of males. So that is the concept. The Ministry of Finance will only say it, but to ensure that it is actually done, it will be the ministries, departments, and agencies to ensure that NAPTIP, for instance, EFCC, ICPC, the gender department of the police, all are now giving better allocation to pursue their fight against sexual and gender-based violence. But if that is not done at agency, department, and ministry level, that statement will just be an umbrella statement, and there will be no action to follow it. But the Ministry of Finance and the President have done theirs. They are saying we are open to accept better budgeting that will prioritize gender. So it is now up to the MDAs to do it. And the National Assembly, in the course of the defense, to point out to these MDAs to show them where is the allocation for maybe inclusive schooling in Sokoto, for instance, or in northern Nigeria. Show us the allocation last year. Show us what you are proposing now. How did they perform last year? And how do you seek to prioritize? If this is not done, it will just be understatement that's been made. But generally, it's a good start for gender-responsive budgeting in Nigeria.
Indeed.
Okay. Now, the presidency intends to spend 1.6 billion naira on new cars. Some people would actually say it's misplaced priority. What's your take on this?
Yeah, generally, it's important to criticize government, but it's nice to do it constructively.
Right.
And one thing, by God's will, that makes us researchers, economists, as we call ourselves, it's not just the BSc, MSc, PhD that we have, but it's the knowledge of how the economy works, the public sector and the private sector. There's how government works. And the presidency, which is the state house, has a lot of departments. You know, on the budget, you just see state house or presidency. But there's VP office, there's president's office, there's chief of staff office, there's office for the SDGs, office for MDGs, there's state house clinic, a lot of departments. There are some internal security operations that goes on there. There's a lot of sectors. So that amount you are saying, don't forget, the kind of vehicles that may be used in the presidency might have to be bulletproof. And with the exchange rate going on right now, these cars, for now, despite the effort we are making through innocent vehicles and the rest, a large chunk of it is still requires exchange rate to procure them. And exchange rate right now is not smiling. It's not smiling at all. The thing is sad. It's really sad. So the presidency just have to use that amount. I'm not just trying to say that the amount is okay, but the best they can do is to auction, if there's any department that's replacing cars, so they can auction it so that auctioning of car will become a revenue generating activity for State House. So they auction cars and remit back to consolidated revenue, and it goes back. So they need to be open in terms of what they do to minimize expenditure and how they generate their own revenue, so that Nigerians will not just be hard on them that you are putting 1 billion for cars. But they should also come out to put out information. Revenue generated from auctioning of last year or 10 years ago's car is so amount, and that will be remitted to consolidated revenue account and to be used to address insecurity or something like that. So there needs to be open budget process, especially for the State House. And if possible, they should make their procurement process very clear, because procurement will make it clear for you to know which car is getting what amount, the importation cost, the registration cost, and the landing cost, and all those things like that. But in general, it's important to prioritize projects that are for development. But these projects are implemented by people, and no one will be happy to hear that the people representing our country are being killed through very sad and cheap means. Right. So that bulletproof car for most of these agencies is part of the security measure. So, but it's like I said, which I really want to emphasize, there's need for open reporting on how auctions are conducted in government agencies, especially the presidency, and revenue generated from them should also be made public, so that people will see that they too are making effort to improve their own internal revenue generating activity. Okay,
so quickly before we round off, what is your general assessment of the budget?
The budget for proposed budget for 2022 is 16.31 trillion. 16.31 trillion. Last year's budget was 13.5 something trillion. Then we did a supplementary budget that took it to 14 point something trillion. So from that 14 to 16, within this year alone, if you are to adjust that 16 trillion to dollar, our budget needs to be even bigger. Ideally, we should be doing a budget of 25 to 30 trillion, given the reality of inflation and exchange rate. But let's just look at it in terms of naira. It shows an increase in allocation, which is nice. It's really nice that the budget increased. I hope that by the time it goes to National Assembly, they will increase a little, because there are a lot of expenditure lines that needs to be addressed. Sadly, the revenue to do it is not there. So we need to improve our effort in internal revenue generation, and then put a searchlight eye on MDs to ensure that they improve their internally generated revenue as well. Then the borrowing, which seems for now to be the lowest hanging fruit for the government to use to finance the budget, there's need to make it more transparent. What do I mean? As soon as the borrowing is to be procured, what it should be used for should be made clear. Yesterday, the executive arm of government did, I think, a midterm ministerial review, and I followed it personally. The VP give detailed speech on how they've implemented the economic and sustainability plan. And other speeches were also made. So you see how the government is actually doing their best to make use of this revenue. But they still need for stronger effort to improve our revenue generation. But generally, the budget in terms of size is okay. The capital budget is this time higher than the debt servicing company, which is okay. But we need to do our best to reduce procurement of new debt and then work out better strategies of servicing our debt while looking at how we can improve revenue generation, even if it means rewarding agencies and departments that are doing their best to contribute to internally generated revenue for the government.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us in the studio, and thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Well,
Thank
Dr.
you so
Abraham
much.
Tarfa is a development economist. Hopefully we'll have you soon again.